Good evening all, and welcome. Have you ever got a feeling that you knew something before it happened? Have you ever felt strange and know that something's in the room, even if you can't see it yet? Things like this could mean you have a sixth sense. I hope you're ready, because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I grew up in a very old house in rural Pennsylvania. The house sat at the base of a mountain on a country road, with our 4 acres being surrounded by woods. Being built in the 1800s, this house still had its original horsehair plaster walls, uneven wooden flooring, and tons of charm. My mother was an avid gardener, a great homemaker, so strangers would often slow down as they passed to appreciate our property, or even stop to ask questions about the house. It seemed to just be different. I believe that my mother and I are both sensitive to energies, and neither of us have ever felt safe in the house, while my father would tease us for being so silly, as he didn't believe in anything that he could not see. There was so much activity in this house that I could probably write a book on all of our experiences. Shaking beds, slamming doors, and flicking lights were so common. I would wake to my bed shaking, grumbling something like, "Oh, stop it," and go back to bed. I never really thought that this was out of the ordinary, until I was old enough to have friends spend the night at our house. So many of my friends had experiences in the house that when I was in 5th or 6th grade in school, I was considered the creepy house girl. So I thought I'd share some of my experiences. I had my friend M over for the weekend when I was around 12. I was going through a really terrible phase where I was really into dark subjects. I watched The Craft and other dark movies with M, who I seemed to really be connected to. I was raised Christian, so I always felt a little uneasy about her interests in witchcraft and such, but I figured it was harmless, since we were just kids and she was playing around. I also had a feeling that this girl was trying to get close to me, because of the rumors that my house was haunted. We had spent the weekend watching scary movies, and had a good bit of adrenaline in our system. I think she was a little disappointed that she didn't experience anything creepy while she stayed over, and she asked if we could try and communicate with the ghosts while we were hanging out in my room. I had grown up accepting these experiences, but had never tried to make contact with anything. I always had the suspicion that most of my experiences were harmless, that there may be something a bit darker in the home. It made me really uneasy, but it was about 2 p.m. and I wasn't so afraid in the daylight, so I agreed. M sat in the middle of my room with her legs crossed. I stayed back a little, sitting in my desk chair. I was apprehensive, but also a little excited at what might happen. She started asking questions like, "Is anyone there? Show yourself. Who are you?" All of these questions elicited nothing. These types of questions continued with no result. Em started to get really annoyed and confrontational in her attempts as the uneventful moments passed, and she kept on. I was getting more and more anxious and wanted our experiment to end, and I could feel the level of tension in the room was making my ears ring. Nothing out of the ordinary was happening, but I had this sense of deep dread in my gut. I wanted it to end, but I didn't want to disappoint Em. I tried to casually end it by saying, let's give up. These ghosts are just chickens. I'm not sure if it was because I had made an effort to communicate, or if what I said really struck a nerve, but my ceiling fan, which wasn't on, fell from the ceiling as Em was under it. We both froze. We were both completely stunned, as we stared up at the swinging fan as it dangled from the electrical cords. I didn't want to believe it, and neither did Em. The fan was relatively new, as it had been installed by my electrician uncle a couple of years prior. We tried to rationalize that there must have been a rodent in the attic that must have hit it somehow, and after a few moments of talking ourselves down, Em called her mum to pick her up. I decided not to tell my mother about what really happened, as it would have really freaked her out. She hadn't been sleeping well, but she was always a little suspicious of how the fan just randomly fell out the ceiling, and we replaced it with a regular light after. Em and I didn't really hang out much after this incident. I decided that she may not be the best influence in my life, especially since the next month or so were really tense for me when I was alone in my bedroom or house. I swore off scary things, thinking that maybe it was just making it worse. But I did continue to have plenty more of experiences like this. A while after, my parents divorced, and I was moved from this house when I was 13. When I was 16 or 17, I decided to move back in with my father, who still lived there. He was a truck driver and only home on weekends, so I was essentially on my own throughout the week. I was really uncomfortable in the upstairs at this point, and typically slept in the living room when my father wasn't home. It got to the point that when you went upstairs, you constantly felt like something was breathing down your neck and about to touch you. So I always made my excursions up there quick and kept my head to the ground. My friend Ashley used to stay with me a lot when she was home from college, due to the no parental supervision thing. We would always come home from hanging out with friends and pass out in the living room. One night, Ashley woke me up with an intense and full-winded scream. She scrambled over to where I was sleeping and screamed at me that someone was upstairs. I knew that Ashley could overreact, and had a hard time getting excited over experiences in this house. So I quelled her fears by checking the upstairs with her. Nothing. She wouldn't let me sleep for the rest of the night, as she explained over and over what happened. She said that she woke up to hearing a large man in work-style boots walking through the hallway at a casual stride. She screamed as the footsteps sounded as if they were coming from the top of the staircase, which enters into the living room, coming from my parents' bedroom. A year later, I had the same experience when I was babysitting my younger sister in that house alone. I woke up to hearing the very real sound of boots clumping from my parents' bedroom to the top of the stairs, where I also screamed. The whole experience lasted maybe 10 seconds, but the scariest part was how real it sounded. We didn't just hear the creaking floor. You could hear the contact of rubber-sole boots on the floor. I talked to my mum recently, which is what prompted me to start lurking in the paranormal subreddit, and she told me that she heard things like that all the time, and ended up switching rooms with my brother early on, because she didn't feel like she was safe there. She told me that she slept on the couch most nights, because of the odd feelings in that room, as well as the footsteps. When I was about to graduate high school and move off to college, I had my last experience in the house. I remember things became really quiet after this experience, as I anxiously counted down the days until I could move to my new apartment. It was a Friday evening, and Ashley was to meet me at my house so that we could go to a party, with the plan of later crashing at my house. I didn't have a car at the time, so I was waiting for her to pick me up. I had about 30 minutes until she would go back from college, so I was doing some laundry and decided to cut my bangs myself in the bathroom. We only had one bathroom that was built on later, and it also housed the washer and dryer. As I was sitting on the sink cutting my hair with the dryer turned off, I knew the load of clothes shouldn't be done yet, so I flipped around and turned it back on. I found that the dryer door was open, and I assumed that a shirt or something must have gotten stuck on the door and forced it open, so I pushed everything in and assured it was secure before starting it back up. I went back to fixing my makeup, and less than 5 minutes later it happened again. Annoyed and not really wanting to deal with experiences at this moment, I turned around and slammed the dryer door shut. I stormed out the bathroom into the kitchen and checked the time. As I did this, the battery-operated radio that we had above the sink turned on static. I stopped and did a double take. iPods didn't exist at the time, so we kept the radio in the kitchen so that my dad could move it around with him as he was doing chores around the house. I remember being really concerned at the time and hearing the volume quickly turn up high. The radio had a circular dial that you used to get to the station you wanted. I could hear the static adjusting, as if someone was turning down the dial slowly to find something to listen to over and over. Seconds later, the lights started flickering, and the bathroom door started swaying violently back and forth. I was shaking at this point and wasn't sure what to do. I tried to find my cell phone, but it wasn't where I remembered leaving it, and I was frantic. I thought that before I ran out of the darkness with no car or phone, I should contact someone. I ran to the house landline phone, which was attached to the wall in the kitchen. I called Ashley to see where she was and frantically explained that something was happening in the house. Ashley was screaming back at me as she could hear the terror in my voice and could also hear weird crackling and the static from the radio. I distinctly remember hearing a screaming noise and spinning around to face the dining room. The chandelier-style light over the table was starting to rock violently, with the lights flickering quickly. The phone cut out. I fell to the floor from my legs shaking with so much fear, and I just screamed. I started screaming out prayers and screaming to be left alone, and it just stopped abruptly. I tried the phone again to see it was not working, and ran out the kitchen door to outside. I sat in the dark for 20 or so minutes, sobbing and waiting for Ashley to pick me up. I tried to find any reason after that to not be alone in the house. Finally, as I mentioned previously, my dad was a huge skeptic. Years after I had moved out, my dad decided to take a nap on the couch. He told me he woke up from his nap with a huge pressure on his chest, like someone was holding him down. He claims that he was kicking his legs and arms, trying to get up, and the first thought in his head was that my daughter was right. I always assumed that he could chalk this up to a bad sleep paralysis experience, but the weird thing is that about a month later, he was in a motorcycle accident in which he broke his back and neck. We always thought that it was a little odd, as he even approached some paranormal investigators to check out the house, but it never happened. At the time all of this was happening, my dad had been renovating the family farmhouse to move to, and shortly after his recovery, he moved, and our old house was vacant for many years, before finally selling it last year. To start off, I want to say that I have a strong sixth sense. I could sense and see things that most other people couldn't. I was like this ever since I was a small child. The apartment I lived in at the time was semi-haunted, as I've always had many weird experiences, and so did my roommate. But that is irrelevant, unless you guys think it played a part in this story. One night I was sitting in the living room browsing the internet on my laptop, while chatting to a friend of mine that I had met in a chat room. We were talking about the usual stuff girls talk about. She had mentioned to me a month prior that she was moving to a new house, and she was eager to share pictures of her new place, and didn't get a chance until this night. As soon as the topic changed and she mentioned her house, I got this eerie feeling. For some reason I didn't want to talk about her house, nor did I want to see any pictures of it. I got the feeling that her house was haunted, and I got creeped out. Before she could go on, I made up an excuse and told her that I needed to go. She stopped me and said, "Wait, before you go, did you know my house was haunted?" I was caught a little off guard, but it was something I had already known. The fact that she had said it to me, though, just confirmed it. Yeah, I kind of felt that way. She told me that her house is haunted by a little girl, but that she is harmless. However, sometimes she does get scared, as this little girl slams doors and makes weird noises. My friend then grabs her Bible and starts praying. Before she could say anything else, I glanced over to my balcony for some reason, and I saw a little girl who looked to be 7 or 8 years old, in a white summer dress and barefoot, staring at me. I quickly looked away in frozen fear. Then I saw her in my mind. She was holding a grey plastic bag right under her hand, and she kept raising it. Then I would randomly see a bathtub full of water while getting shortness of breath. I assumed she was drowned or suffocated, and that she wanted me to know. But why the hell did she want me to feel it? I just couldn't figure out what it was, and at this point I didn't really care. I was telling my friend that I was super scared. The breathing got worse, and I almost felt like I wasn't breathing anymore. This little girl was literally making me feel the way she was feeling when she died. With the little energy and breath I had left, I had tried to call out for my roommate, but she was fast asleep in her room and couldn't hear me. I glanced over to my phone, which was on the coffee table, and tried reaching out to call 911. When all of a sudden the awful feeling stopped, I could breathe again, although it wasn't totally over. I could still breathe, and I told my friend what was happening, and she told me to tell her to leave. I was pissed off, so told the little girl to get lost, and as soon as I did, she let out the most ear-piercing scream in my right ear, which caused me to almost go deaf, and with that she was gone. A few days passed, and I hadn't heard from my friend in a while. When I did finally end up speaking to her, she told me that she'd done some research on the house's history, and that she'd found out that a long time ago, a young girl had died in that house due to a medical condition called cystic fibrosis. It's a disease that causes the body to make thick, sticky mucus. The mucus is thick and sticky and clogs up lungs, which makes it difficult to breathe. That's what she died from. I don't know why she was showing me plastic bags or bathtubs filled with water. If she was trying to lead me to the answer, that was definitely not the way to do it. What could we possibly do? And why the hell should we care? Anyway, I had a falling out with this friend of mine and stopped talking to her, and haven't been updated since. I remember the first notable thing that happened to me was when I was 8 or 9. I was running down the stairs and fell down a whole flight of them. During this, I had an out-of-body experience. I remember watching myself crack my shoulder blade and watching myself move my head and neck away from the hardwood stairs as I fell in slow motion. Then suddenly, blinking and being back in first person. I had a lot of weird things happen after this. Little things, like I would get songs stuck in my head, and upon getting into the car or walking into the store, the song I had just gotten stuck in my head would be on, at the exact part of the song I had been on. Once it happened while I visited my grandma in Washington. We drove to the mall, and I got into this one part of a police song stuck in my head, and when we get to the mall I had to use the bathroom. So we walked through the department store, and she waited for me outside. I walked in where the audio on the store speaker was much easier to hear, and it was the same song playing. Anyway, I always really liked these things when they'd happen. It made me feel connected to something bigger than I was, and I was lucky to have figured out how to tune into it. As I got older, I played around with astral travel and had a few really bad experiences which I chalked up to a shitty nightmare. At first they weren't too scary, just really uncomfortable. When my grandpa died in '07, I had my first sleep paralysis / talking to the dead experience. It was the day before his funeral. He was older and had been in bad health for many years before his death. It was sad when he passed, but he died in a peaceful hospice surrounded by family. I never met his mum, my great-grandma, but had heard that she was an intense little firecracker of a woman. I knew she was shorter and a strong personality, but we weren't the type of family that kept a lot of photos around or talked about paranormal stuff, so I didn't know her face at all. I remember I laid in bed the night my grandpa died and kept thinking about how I felt like I was one of the people who was tuned into something bigger, and kept thinking, Papa, please just tell me something that can make Mum feel better. Something to let us know you're okay and at peace and didn't suffer. I didn't get anything. I had literally no idea what I was doing anyway, and I fell asleep. I woke up feeling pressure on my chest and could only open my eyes a little bit. At the foot of my bed stood this woman who was short, had a tall beehive hairdo, and wore a red sweater. She had heavy makeup on and just stood there kind of staring at me, but kind of just existing too. She didn't say anything, but she wagged her finger at me in a "be careful, young lady" kind of way. She smiled a little and waved. I tried to sit up, but couldn't. I felt so pressured, I eventually couldn't open my eyes anymore and fell back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, my mum was already up editing photos for a slideshow for the funeral. She showed me the in-progress slideshow while we had breakfast, and literally no joke, she scrolled past a picture and the same frickin' woman. The woman wore a red sweater and had a tall beehive hairdo and heavy makeup. I yelled, "What?" or something to that effect, and asked her to go back to the one of the woman. My mum explained that was my great-grandma, my grandpa's mum. I told her this story, and my mum, not a big believer in this stuff, was like, "Wow, honey," but didn't give it much more than that, understandably. I could offer no comforting words. My grandma didn't say anything to help her feel better. I asked her about the red sweater, and she said that it was her signature color. I would often feel pressure on my chest or legs, and wake up from a sound sleep and feel like I was being pushed into the bed and would see things moving in my room. I would get really scared and try to squirm out, but couldn't. It was the typical feel someone in the room kind of feeling, and like you were stuck and someone was holding you down. It scared the shit out of me every time, and it happened about 2 times a month. Eventually I started cosmetology school, and my friend was dating this guy. I'd only met this guy once, but I knew through her stories, in beauty school you have hours on end to talk, that he was a badass metalhead who drove a motorcycle. Very nice and kind and good to her. He had gone out one afternoon for a long ride on a nice long canyon called Santiago. We lived in Orange County, California, and this is a popular ride. As he came around a blind corner, he hit another motorcyclist head-on, killing them both instantly. I was so sad for him and her and their families. I had never known someone my age like that die, and my first thought was I wanted to do the same thing as with my mum, have something to say or do to help heal my friend. She was a wreck. In the first few days, we'd stayed up all hours of the night on the phone talking. One night she was particularly sad when we hung up, and I kept thinking of him, and asked him to come and tell me something that would make her feel better, and to know he's okay. I again felt a huge weight on my chest. I started getting this overwhelming uneasiness, and eventually said out loud, "Stop, it's too much. I don't give you permission anymore." The pressure immediately relieved. I calmed down and fell asleep, and my dreams were so incredibly vivid. I dreamed that we were at the Angel Stadium, and I had gotten tickets to go to the team-only areas where you do the meet and greets. I was waiting in that long open-door corridor where the teams emerge from the stadium. Then I was waiting for the team to walk by me on their way to the game. I saw the rally monkey mascot person and approached asking for a photo. The person in the suit greeted me by name and said, "Stephanie, oh hi, wow," and removed the mascot head. Underneath was Miles, my friend's now deceased boyfriend. He and I did not know each other, but he proceeded to ask how I was and how his girlfriend was, and to give her a big hug from me, and we parted ways. I woke up and called her, and she gasped, and was happy but confused. She knew he and I did not know each other, and she asked me how I knew he was an Angels fan. I didn't, and later at school she showed me photos of his room. This was before social media, so I couldn't go look or get a photo via text, but he had been a rally monkey stuffed animal collector. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe this weird random fact had come through. All I knew of this guy was that he wore black leather jackets and listened to some Misfits. Totally the opposite of a baseball fan. I had no idea. It reinforced that I was onto something bigger, and that I would be okay. I just needed to be in control, and to be careful. There were more incidents like this one over time. They morphed into night terrors and sleep paralysis. I had friends who moved away, and I would have dreams where I was in their room and could see everything. This was before social media, so I did not see photos or video chat in order to know what their rooms looked like, but I could describe things. It was fun sometimes, as well as scary. I once was at a friend's house in San Francisco, and felt like there was a bunch of kids in this hallway when I went to pee in the middle of the night. I told him I felt like I was about to bump into them when I walked into the darkness of the bathroom, and we ended up investigating to find that the place was an old orphanage. A little while after, my boyfriend of 5 years at that point and I moved from San Diego to Orange County after he got out of the military. We were finally starting the normal chapter of our lives and were stoked to not be dealing with deployments anymore. We got an apartment in a little place near our parents and were so excited. It was a tiny 500 square foot, 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment on the top floor of a large complex. When we moved in, I was hanging clothes in my closet and made a joke to him about this attic opening that was just like in the movie The Grudge, where the demon Japanese ghost lived in the attic, and Sarah Michelle's character discovers it when she peeks her head up there. It was literally just like that movie, so I joked to my boyfriend about it. A night or two later, I was going to sleep, and he came in to say goodnight. Jokingly, he opens the closet, peeks his head in, and looks like he's talking towards the attic hatch. "Okay, she's going to be alone. You can come out now." I laughed and was a little scared, but let it go and went to sleep. That night, it all began. I woke up feeling like my ankles were being pushed into the bed. The pressure was on my feet and ankles, and I tried to move but couldn't. I saw little twinkly lights floating around the room, but knew I had weird sleep paralysis stuff before, and tried to relax and breathe, and was eventually able to fall asleep. My boyfriend was asleep next to me a few hours later, when I woke up to the house completely quiet except for knocking. I heard it directly above my head. Random little loud knocks, loud enough to stir me, and know where in the house they were originating from. I laid there listening. The knocks jumping around the house, staying in one spot for 5 or 6 knocks, and then taking a break and popping to a new spot. It went from the bedroom, to the front living room, to the bathroom across the hall, and all over the house. I thought I was the only one awake, but I heard my boyfriend move and looked over to see that he was laying there awake too, very quietly. We were both paralyzed with fear and confusion. We had both been listening to this, assuming the other was asleep for roughly 10 minutes. We asked each other if the other had heard it, and yep, both of us had been listening. It stopped, and we were able to fall back asleep and talked about it the next day. The knocking happened a few times over the weeks and months. One time, he came home to the cabinets in the kitchen open. Once we came home to our little futon couch tipped backwards, the bench part in the air, and the back on the floor against the door. Once, it was all the shoes pushed against the door from the inside, making it really hard to push the door open. But nothing was very confrontational. We set up a camera to run overnight at one point, but the camera was older, and we couldn't get it to stay on for any length of time. I put flour down on the floor a few times to see if I could catch any footprints. Nothing. Sometimes the house got a smell like burning, like that same charcoal, almost wood kind of smell. I had talked to the complex about it, but wasn't sure if it was something bigger. But they came and repeatedly said nope, that nothing was wrong with any of the connections in the building. Then things started to escalate. One day I didn't have to work until later in the day, so I slept in after my boyfriend had left for work. He left as it was starting to get light out. I fell back asleep, and I woke up a little bit later when I heard the foot on carpet sound. Really soft shuffling kind of sound. I opened my eyes a little, not moving, just assuming that my boyfriend had returned home. Perhaps come back for something he forgot. So I closed my eyes again. I was laying on my stomach on his side of the bed, so I couldn't see if he came into the room, but I knew the bedroom door was open. I felt something press on the mattress near my feet. Still assuming it was him leaning on the bed for something, I still didn't move. I felt it press further up the bed, like two hands on each side of my leg, a hand in between my legs and another on the outside of it. The pressing down was super close to my body, and it started to draw on me that it couldn't be my boyfriend. He had to work. Why would he come back home to mess with me? I started to try and turn over, and I realized I was frozen. I couldn't move. I got a knot in my stomach and was so terrified. I could feel it pressing down on the mattress next to my hips, and I just kept thinking, don't get Billy on the bed. Don't get Philly on the bed, or get on top of me. I'm not sure why, but I figured if it didn't crawl fully on the bed, I would be okay. But it was so hard to breathe. I started crying and felt like I was trying so hard to move. I was going to rip out of my skin. Finally it subsided, and I was able to roll over, and I swear I must have grunted or made some weird noise, because I felt like I was released. I cried and called my mum and left the house. I ended up just going to work in her clothes because I refused to go home alone. I kind of cooled off at this point after the first incident, and didn't have a choice but to sleep in my apartment, as I paid a stupid amount of rent for it. The same type of incident happened about once a month, and after finally 5 times of it happening, I saw it. It was the same situation. My boyfriend left for work and I was sleeping. This time, I'm on my side of the bed facing the wall. Our bed set came with nightstands for each side of the bed, and we each had one on each side of the headboard, so there was a small walkway of space to my side. I laid there and heard the foot shuffling again. This had come as a signal that I knew that I had sleep paralysis, so I just tried to stay calm, knowing whatever it was had not hurt me before. It just seemed to want to scare me. I expected I'd feel something pressing on the bed any second, but I didn't. I had my eyes a little open, peeking out, not sure if I wanted to see whatever this thing was that visited me when I was alone lately. And I saw this black figure come up to the foot of the bed, right against the frame. It shuffled really slowly up from the foot of the bed, moving towards me. I couldn't see its face or skin, but I could see it had a robe or cloak on. I pretended to be asleep, but was watching it. I realized that its attention wasn't on me. It was on my nightstand. I had a small lamp, my phone, a clock, and a few rings and my necklace on top of the nightstand. I was facing towards this nightstand, and this tall-robed thing was standing at it. So when this creature, I guess I could call it approached, and I could see its hands coming out of the sleeves of the robe. It had one too many finger joints. The hands were long and slender, delicate-looking hands, and the fingers were just too long, really pointy and pale. I watched it lightly touch all the stuff on my nightstand. It would use the tip of its creepy finger to just slightly feel whatever item was on the nightstand ever so slightly, just enough to make it move a little bit. I'm so focused on this horrifying creature standing right next to me and trying to stay silent and calm. It smelled like burning, like that same charcoal, almost sour wood kind of smelling. It didn't pick anything up, but it just seemed curious about the stuff on my nightstand. I watched this for a few minutes. It touched each thing slowly a few times, turned towards the window, and shuffled back out of sight. I sat up and didn't know if I had ever moved that fast in my life. I ran out the house and went to my mum's again. I almost called the fire department because my house smelled like smoke, like this putrid, smoky smell. I was sick to my stomach and actually refused to sleep alone after that. I would wait to sleep until my boyfriend was ready for bed, or I'd fall asleep on the couch near his desk. It started driving a wedge between us, caused a lot of fights that I attributed to negative energy in the house that we both unconsciously picked up on. The episodes of knocking continued as we lived in the apartment for a full 2 years. We eventually decided to move to our parents' house and started packing up to leave. The episodes of coming home to open cabinets, feeling like something was trying to crawl onto the bed, even when my boyfriend was sleeping next to me, had increased to almost once a week by the time we were moving out. We were frightened all of the time, and it was terrible. But it didn't end there. I realized that I had not had sleep paralysis or feeling like something was crawling onto the bed with me since I'd moved out, and didn't think much of it. I'd always assumed it was connected with me, and I'd never get away from it. Anyway, I was napping at my mum's and felt this immense heat, and woke up slightly, and realized I had sleep paralysis again. Only this time, I wasn't scared, just too hot. I opened my eyes a little and saw this old man. I couldn't see his face for some reason, but he was in a tank top and shorts. I could see by his skin and general body shape that he was much older, but I had no idea who he was. He came to the side of the couch and sat on the coffee table. I laid there, still pretending to be asleep, and I felt it move the hair from my forehead and lean down and breathe on my face. I started to do the thing when you're sobbing, and your stomach is heaving down with each sob because it's so intense. I couldn't feel tears, but I could feel this need to just deeply cry. It sat there brushing the hair from my face down my shoulder for what felt like 10 minutes. And I just laid there, totally stuck and too scared to move. I eventually saw it get up and shuffle away, like bare feet, shuffling along the tiled floor she had in her house. I woke up, and it felt like it was letting me go and saying goodbye. I felt like it came to me one last time to let me go. It's been 4 years since those incidents, and I've literally never had another one since we moved out of that apartment. My boyfriend and I are going on 11 years, and are as happy as can be, and we now live out of state. This happened after I turned 12. At the time, my father was battling cancer for the second time. I was 10 when he beat it the first time round. However, it came back in full force. Despite hoping he could beat it again, things weren't looking so good for him. During his last days in the hospital, I would visit him. Despite being out of it, being a kid, it was rather distressing seeing him so pale and skinny, and barely recognizing me now and then. It was especially bad when I visited him the day before he passed. My mum didn't want to upset me even further, so she sent me to my grandfather's house while she stayed overnight with him. Since I was old enough to be home alone for a while, I was sent back to my house. I spent the majority of the time alone, getting a few calls from my mother making sure I was okay. However, while I was sitting in my room playing video games, I got a very strong feeling that something happened. Only minutes after, did I receive a call from my mother telling me she would be home shortly. Thinking back on the call now, I knew she was trying to not sound upset while telling me this, but I didn't pick up on it. I still had the off feeling. I knew deep down what had happened. When my mother walked through the doors, she told me my father had passed away and broke down crying right there. I gave my mother a hug, and as we were facing the door she came through, we saw it. We saw a tiny shadowy figure materialize and walk forward into our home. I would assume it was my imagination, but the fact that my mother saw it as well proved it wasn't. We realized my father came home immediately after passing, not wanting to leave us quite yet. Since then, I have been a strong believer of the paranormal. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry that there was no Bruce Willis in this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. That always helps me out a bunch. Something else you could do is, if you're new here, why not subscribe and press the little bell icon to be notified every night that I post. Every night. Anyway, I also the other day launched a really cool video on witches on my other channel. It's a history kind of video about 5 witches through history, and well, it was a lot of effort, and if you haven't seen it already, I'd really appreciate it if you went and checked it out. It would help me out a lot, and I think you'll actually really enjoy it. The first story is quite long, but if you listen to the end, it's worth it, and then the other 2 are a fair bit shorter. Love to know what you think, so yeah, please check it out if you haven't already. But anyway, with that, I am now going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.